Another video on sourdough bread, and well, kind of not really sourdough bread, but making bread with fast acting yeast and treating it like a sourdough bread to get a better type of loaf, but this time I'm going to add some of my sourdough starter because I needed to throw sorry, I'm clearing my throat. I needed to throw some of it away. And I was kind of thinking, well, instead of throwing it away, let's put it in a normal batch of bread and see if it improves the flavour. We're going to use some fast acting yeast, so there will be already some sourdough starter yeast in the starter already, but that won't get going. It'll take far too long for that to get going, and this fast acting yeast will have got going for that. So we've only got the starter in for flavour, and we've got the dried yeast in for the kind of fast actingness, so it should kind of speed up the process. Although it's late at night at the moment when I'm doing this. I need to bake the bread tomorrow. I'm a little bit pushed time tomorrow, so I'm going to do it tonight. I'm going to mix all the ingredients together, leave it for an hour, then knead it for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put it in the fridge overnight, and then that might just prove in the fridge overnight, but we'll kind of see. So what's the recipe? Let's kind of work my way through this. My standard sourdough recipe is a kilo of flour, 600 grams worth of active starter, and then so that's a half ratio of flour to water. So if I put in 100 grams worth of starter, I'll need to put in 250 grams worth of water and 250 grams worth of flour. Mix that together, get it active, and then add that to my bread. And then it's about 500 grams worth of water and a good pinch of salt. So I've kind of, that's kind of how do I kind of explain this. So obviously the active starter has got flour in it. So in total recipe there is 1.3 kilos worth of flour and about 800 grams worth of water, and that includes all the flour in the starter, all the flour in the dry mix, all the flour, and all the water that we add to it, and all the water that's in the starter, if that makes sense. So in total, that's kind of the amount. So I've got 300 grams worth of starter, therefore I have compensated with the amount of water and flour that I've got. So, God, that was kind of, I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me, kind of. So I'm going to put the majority of the water in with the starter, and I'm going to hold some of the water back, and that's what I'm going to put the fast acting yeast in, so it shouldn't make too much of a difference. So we'll just pour that into there. I don't want to pour the yeast into there, because I think it'll take a little bit longer to get going. I don't know, this just feels right. I can't 100% say why I'm doing it this way, but it kind of just feels right. It just kind of feels right. I'm going to sneeze. So, I didn't sneeze on my hands. That's a good thing. So, what we do first is we mix flour into water and into the starter, and then we roughly mix it together, and then we leave it for an hour. And then that allows the water to completely permeate all into the flour. And it also, with doing that, what it means is that you can incorporate, have a higher hydration level, meaning that we can put more water into the dough. Whereas if we were just to mix it together and knead it straight away, we have a drier dough. But because we allow everything to completely get into all the water to get completely into the flour, it means we can have a wetter dough, meaning, well, or like a higher hydration, which is what you generally have with a sourdough, which makes it a lot different from a normal bread, and also the time that it ferments and rises as well. This was one of the other differences, and you can layer it and all kinds of different things. But that's basically the two differences: the length of time that it proves, stroke ferments, and the amount of water that's in the dough. So it doesn't need to. It just needs to be roughly mixed together, just so everything's incorporated together. It doesn't need to be smooth or anything like that. It can be a bit of a shaggy mess. And then maybe I'll add that in there. You see, the yeast needs some liquid to kind of get going. I don't think by adding it straight into the flour and water, it would just kind of start off. That's another experiment, isn't it? Do we need to? Can we just add the yeast straight into the flour and the water without adding it into some water first? That's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? Maybe I should have read the instructions on the packet. Anyway, well, let's put this in there. That's fine. That's got a bit of moisture to it. I have every confidence. I don't know if the two different types of yeast that we're using here are going to go to war, because the sourdough yeast is a different type of yeast to the fast-acting yeast. Fast-acting yeast was a type of yeast that they found that was, well, there's lots of different types of yeast. There's lots of different types of bacteria, if you think of it that way. And what they did was they found a yeast that was particularly fast-acting. I don't know where they found it, but they found it. Yeah, it'll be alright. Like, if you kind of imagine that there is different types of yeast that we use for making bread, and there's different types of yeast that we use for brewing beer, and there's different types of yeast that we use for making wine. So we can't really use the yeast that we use for making I've probably done this wrong. No, we'll have to edit it sometime, won't we? So we won't use the yeast that we use for making bread to make beer, and we wouldn't use the yeast for making beer to make bread. And also the type of yeast that you use with wine making affects the kind of flavour as well. And there's different alcohol contents and all that kind of stuff. Right, that's fine. We'll leave that for an hour. I've got a snotty nose now. We'll leave that for an hour to completely saturate, and then we'll knead it for 10 minutes, and then we'll have it in the fridge overnight. So you don't need to see me kneading it. The next bit will be it coming out of the fridge tomorrow morning. Right, we've had a slow proof overnight, and it's been out of the fridge for a couple of hours. So it's risen, it's ready. We need to knock it back, and and I was kind of thinking, let's have a go at making a couple of loaves. So I've got some loaf tins, so we'll have a go at making some loaves. I just need to remember how to form a loaf. But anyway, so it's kind of like if we're doing something, we might as well have a go at something else at the same time. Use it as a bit of practice. I mean, I'm more interested in the flavour of it, if I'm honest. So I reckon maybe two loaves. We'll kind of have a see. I think does 500 grams sound about right for? No, I think that's going to be too big. I think that'd be too big. No, let's do 3 loaves. Let's do 3. So we'll give it a bit of a knead, and then we'll weigh how much the dough is. I think we need to be about 700 grams, something like that. So got my scales, and then can you get an idea, and then So it wants to be about 650 grams per loaf. That's more than that. That's going to stick. That's about right. So that's about right. That's not too sticky. So move it around, knock the air out of it. And then we need to form a rectangle, which I've just torn the dough. And I haven't got any flour out. We'll see how it turns out. Alright. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit of flour. Tiny, alright. Let's be more down there. A little bit more flour. So, where are we? So, into half, and then roll, I think, and then into there. Yeah, that's going to be that's going to be about the right size for a loaf. So let's do that again. And about half, which is that way. Okay, so it's about right. Move it around a bit, and then we're going to prove it for about an hour and a half, because I'm going out for an hour and a half. Well, hour and a half maybe, and we're going to see if they're ready when I come back. So, let's let flour on top. I'm much more a fan of life of just having a go. I'm not doing too much research. I think you can scare yourself sometimes. If you're going to see, if you watch some videos and watch people kind of doing things, you're kind of like, oh, that looks extremely difficult. Whereas I don't think, certainly watching someone who's really skilled at something, it's just mesmerising. Whereas you kind of think, I could never do that. I could never be that good and be that skilled as that person. But that person's had loads of experience about doing things. You know, and if you'd have had that amount of experience, you'd be that good. So I think you just need to have a go and keep having a go. You know, failure is the best lesson. You know, failure is the best lesson. You know, you should work hard. You should embrace failure. You know, so probably need to be more rolling, but that in half together, that to there, and then roll and create a bit of tension, and then into the loaf tin. Okay, and then let's do the last one as well. I think one of my slight bugbears is like when someone does something, they're showing you how to do something, they do it so fast that you just can't, I should have kneaded it a bit, that you just can't grasp what they're doing. You know, classic example is someone trying to teach me how to do a butcher's knot, and I was just, okay, just one more time, and just like, can you show me one more time? And they did, and I just couldn't get it. You know, it was just, and in the end I was like, oh yeah, I think I've got it, and I just kind of thought, oh, I'll just work it out myself. You know, I think it's a good teacher is someone who knows how to slow down what you're actually doing. You know, like ladies in Italy who do pasta, and it's just mesmerising to watch, especially when they make things like orecchietti. If I pronounce that right, probably not. So we've got some air balls in there, but that's fine. Knocking them out. A rough rectangle. That'd be. Okay, that's fine. So into there, press in. You're supposed to do the heel of your hand. Fingers is fine, and then into there. That's probably better. And then a roll up, and then we're going to bake it in the loaf tins. So seam side down. I seem to remember. Yeah, seem to remember. They look about even, and then we'll kind of give them a while. See how long it takes to prove. There's always a danger that it might overprove, but we'll see how we go. They're proved. Don't really much bigger than that, and then they need to go in the oven. And I better push the time. So the oven's on full whack. Hopefully they'll be cooked because I'm in a bit of a rush now. So 25 minutes, something like that. We'll see how we go. I think we're ready. They look like they're ready. Let's see if they collapse on me. But I'm going to have to take them to work because otherwise it's going to be late when I get home. Are they going to come out of those? There we go. Sounds alright. Sounds alright. So we'll take those to work and then we'll have a cook into them when they're cool. Oh, should have turned the camera off, shouldn't I? You don't need to see me putting them in a box, that's boring. So, not the best loaf, not best loaf. However, it's the first loaf I've ever made, so we can be a little bit forgiving. So, I haven't bought my stand with me, so I'll have to pause, slice into it, and then we'll have a look at it. There we go. So, that's not so bad, is it? That's not so bad. That's got a nice texture to it. Let's see how it tastes. I'm not going to use that bit. I'm going to use this bit. It's certainly the sourdough starter that's helped with chewiness, and there's more flavour to it. So that kind of works. If you want to improve the flavour of, if you want to make a quick loaf, and you normally make sourdough loaves, you can take some of your starter, add it to a normal batch of bread, compensating for weights of flour and water and all those type of things, and you can make yourself a half decent tasting loaf. I will get round to having another go at making loaves and getting better at them, but not just yet, because I've got loads of other things to kind of do, but that works, and it's nice. Bit of a short end to that video. And I was at work and I was a bit busy and I was a bit distracted. So these are just the crusts of the bread that have come back. And the one we got, I cut it a few hours ago and it's still kind of quite moist. I think so. We kind of need to sum up, don't we? So there was the video before where we took everything that we know about sourdough, but used, instead of using a sourdough starter, we used fast-acting yeast, and it turned out pretty well. But the bread didn't have much flavour to it, and wasn't as kind of like robust and chewy and flavoursome as a sourdough. It was nice, and if you want to get like fast results and a nice split in the bread, and you kind of want to make some bread, do you know, it makes a lovely loaf. It makes good loaf. Just not as good as a sourdough, but a sourdough is like, do you know, like maybe a day and a half process, maybe a 2-day process, depending what time of year and kind of what you've kind of got on, which is kind of like a bit of a big commitment. So what you can do is you can take, this has proved, it's a nice tasting bread. It's not as nice as a proper sourdough, but it's a nice tasting bread. It's certainly nicer than just the fast-acting yeast. But you can take some of your sourdough starter, and that sourdough starter will make the bread chewier. It's got more to it, so it's got more tear and it's got more flavour. and it's got certainly a lot more about it by just adding some of that sourdough starter. And it's a better way of using it up rather than throwing it away, because you just end up with lots of starter. You feed it, unless you're making bread twice a week, you end up with a lot of sourdough starter because you feed it every 5 days. So you're adding flour to it, and you're adding flour to it, and more flour to it, and more flour to it, and you just end up throwing it away because you don't want to. So you couldn't just. What's the best way to describe this? You kind of. I add. There's normally about that much sourdough starter in my jar, so the lid's not on properly. But there's normally about that much, and I add 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water to keep it fed. But obviously, that's for that volume of starter. 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour is a good amount. But if that jar was 3 times the size and 3 times as full, then 50 grams worth of flour and 50 grams worth of water wouldn't be just kind of quite enough to keep it healthy and well fed. So you end up having to throw some of your starter away and taking it back down to a reasonable level, and then 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour is like a suitable amount to kind of freeze it. So instead of throwing it away, you can use it up in bread. And to make a loaf, when did I start that? So I started like last night, and then I baked it today. But the loaf that I made in like the previous video, which was just the fasting yeast, I started that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was baked by 8. Did I bake it before? Yeah, it was baked by 7:30. You know, so that's no time at all. So if you had if you were just doing it on a regular day, I'm waffling, I know I am. If you just do it on a regular day, and you could have a loaf made in 6 hours, and by adding the sourdough starter to it, not actually using that as the yeast, but using it as a flavour, you get a much better loaf. I made those into loaves, but like the rounds with the nice split on, it'll do this exactly the same thing. But there you go, it works. It's a good idea. It cuts down on the waste, and you get a faster loaf. You don't get as good a flavour, but you get a good flavour. You know, so there you go. I've done the experiment, so you don't have to.